Joining me live now is ANU Associate Professor Matthew Sussex. Thank you for your time. I suppose 4 years in, does it feel as though we're closer to a genuine ceasefire and peace at 4 years compared to 3 years? We have a process, but it's not going very well.
No, Tom, it's certainly not going very well and not going very fast. Unfortunately, the peace negotiations keep running up against the same roadblock, and that is how much territory Ukraine is going to have to give away in order to satisfy Vladimir Putin. And so far, Putin and the Kremlin have just continued to hold on to the original line, which is they want, large portions of Ukraine that they currently don't control to be handed over to Russia, and that would of course be political suicide for Vladimir Zelensky in Ukraine. So it does look as though this impasse will carry on for the foreseeable future, at least.
Has there been, from Ukraine's point of view, a genuine recognition now that their previous view, not that long ago, I suppose, was we won't give up a single bit of territory, and that they've not formally exceeded that? And I guess there's a little debate around legal versus de facto, but they've actually come to the negotiation table giving up something they don't want to give up. Is that accurate to say, do you think?
Yeah, look, I think it is. I think there's a sense in Kiev that, if in fact it gets robust security guarantees from the West, and that means particularly the United States. Without the United States, those sort of guarantees of security become less sticky and less useful, I think, for Ukraine. But if that's the case, then I think they'd probably be prepared to have a situation whereby some amount of territory, is de facto controlled by Russia, whether or not they recognise it. And then if not membership in NATO, then, some kind of pathway to the European Union, backed up by effectively US and European firepower in case Vladimir Putin decides to have another go in a couple of years.
There has been some extra territory seized by Russia. There's a sort of spike, I suppose, in importance anytime people think perhaps there's a peace deal, because the more you have, then the more you get. Is it fair to say, though, fears of big territory going to the Russians, Ukraine's managed to largely thwart that?
Yeah, I think it is. And in fact, over the last 20 days, the Ukrainians have taken back about 300 square kilometres of land that previously the Russians conquered. So even so, this is fairly incremental on both sides. And it would take something really quite dramatic to change that picture. There are some suggestions that Vladimir Putin says that he's prepared to fight on for another 2 years because he believes that he's winning. But it's certainly also the case that the attempts by the Russian government to get Russians to sign up to go and fight are starting to wear pretty thin. The Russian government was offering just recently 3 million rubles, which is about $56,000 as a sign-on bonus for people who would sign up for the Russian armed forces. And the uptake is very low. So at the current rate of losses, and Russia has lost an estimated 1.4 million people killed or wounded in the conflict, there might be the only choice for Vladimir Putin is to do something like to turn to, national mobilization and conscription, just to have the sheer numbers to continue the fight.
Which does show the stress. You don't see it as much, it's not as visible, but the stress on the Putin side, we know the staggering job that's going to be ahead for Ukraine if they can finally secure peace. But what about on the Russian side? You mentioned the casualties, estimates of 300,000 or so dead. Is this going to mean any future conflict the EU might fear Russia might go about? When this first happened, we thought Ukraine first, what next? That they won't be able to do it. Maybe they have the capability, but there's a lot of families missing a son to never return right now in Russia. That's got to hurt somewhat.
Oh, look, that's absolutely right. That it does hurt, but it hurts mainly in Russia's regions, the places where the poorer people on the margins of Russian society are, often from minority ethnic groups, rather than the ethnic Russians that live in places of power like Moscow and St. Petersburg. Now, if it does mean that Putin needs or feels the need to conscript large numbers of Russians from those cities, then that will amplify the political pressure. That said, of course, the threat to Europe, I think, remains a very live one. Russia has proven that it has the capability and the willingness to do all sorts of grey zone sabotage and hybrid attacks that end up killing people in Europe. And once there is a ceasefire, assuming we get there at some point, it's certainly, I think, true that Putin will turn his eye to see what other parts of the former Soviet Union he might try and reincorporate, whether it's the Baltic states or perhaps beyond.
Matthew Sussex, appreciate your time as always.